Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
Alabama, Alabama, we will aye be true to thee. From thy southern shores where groweth by the sea thine orange tree.
Hi, I'm Doug Phillips, and this beautifully quiet setting seems the perfect spot to reflect on the past, 200 years or so of Alabama history. Historians tell us that this town was the very first capital of Alabama.
In 1817, Mississippi became a state, and Alabama Territory was created in 1817. The first legislative meeting of the territorial government was here in St. Stephen's in 1818. This, therefore, makes Old St. Stephen's the first capital of Alabama.
Sounds reasonable to me. On the other hand, this is not where Alabama's first constitutional convention was held.
We were the first constitutional convention of 1819. We are considered a capital. Some people call us a temporary capital. It was a short time, but we were a capital nonetheless. We are the birthplace of Alabama.
I can see Huntsville as a capital. It is where our founding fathers put together the Constitution that would become Alabama's state system of government.
Huntsville, we have a problem with them too. We call them the Motel 6 of state capitals. That's where you stay while your real house is being built. But Cahaba was always meant to be the first state capital. It's a gift from the federal government for us to build our capital on it. So we had a lot of jealousy from Tuscaloosa, Huntsville, Montgomery.
Our first governor, William Wyatt Bibb, may well have intended for Cahaba to be the state's permanent capital. But in this case, permanent lasted about 5 years.
There was this stipulation that in 1825, the legislature could decide whether to leave it in Cahaba or to move it. And because of various political reasons, it was determined eventually to move it to Tuscaloosa.
Really? You mean even 200 years ago, people were playing politics?
They'd already decided to move the capital, and the fight was between Selma, Montgomery, and Wetumpka. And after the first round of votes, it came down to kind of a close vote between Wetumpka and Montgomery. And Hooper tells the story of this man from Montgomery who picked up the menu from one of the hotels in Wetumpka that showed on the menu things like fried possum and black-eyed peas and things like that, and a menu from one of the hotels in Montgomery that showed things like oysters and champagne and fine steaks. And he put those two menus out in the lobby of the legislature the night before, and the votes automatically switched the next day from Wetumpka to Montgomery. And I think there's still a real appreciation of fine dining in Montgomery because of that.
Join me for a journey across 200 years of Alabama history as we visit all of Alabama's state capitals. We'll explore what these capitals have in common. We'll inquire into the controversies that separated these capitals. We'll investigate the legends, the myths, and dare I say, the ghost stories that still haunt old Capitol grounds. And we will answer that nagging question, capital with an A or capital with an O? This program is about a land unknown to many people, a land that in many ways has maintained its native natural wonders, a place of bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the wild wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama. Welcome to Discovering Alabama, and welcome to Old St. Stephen's, Alabama. This site was the first town laying claim as the seat of government before Alabama was even 10 years old. As long as we have a bit of capital controversy going on anyway, I'd like to suggest yet another first capital, back long before Old St. Stephen's.
Moundville is one of the major cultural centers of the southeastern United States, and in fact the eastern woodlands, before the arrival of Europeans. It is a capital for an area. Sometimes they're referred to as polities, these regions where a site has a political influence is its polity.
When historians talk about the 5 capitals of Alabama, they're talking about historical capitals. That is to say, the capitals for which we have written record. The 5 historical capitals are Old St. Stephen's, Huntsville, Old Cahaba, Tuscaloosa, and Montgomery. The prehistoric wonder we know today as Moundville Archaeological Park ceased to be inhabited by Native Americans even before European settlement. Why? Was it politics? We may never know the entire story of why Moundville was abandoned. But no need to look to prehistoric native cultures for capitals that have been abandoned. We can look right here at Old St. Stephen's, Alabama.
As a historical archaeologist, I was just blown away by the fact that the site is early settlement and colonial settlement, and I knew that archaeologically it was undisturbed. Especially after studying the history, you find out that St. Stephen's started somewhere around 1790. It became United States property in 1799, and it brought federal oversight into this area. It was on what was called then the southeastern frontier, only populated by people that really had a lot of guts to come down here because it was a dangerous place. The Choctaw were very friendly, and fortunately they lived on this side of the Tombigbee River. The Creeks, not so much. So it wasn't until after the end of the War of 1812 or the Creek War that this became relatively safe. So St. Stephen's boomed, and by 1818, it was the biggest town in all of Alabama.
St. Stephen's, like Moundville, had a political influence that reached far beyond its metropolitan borders. And there's another thing St. Stephen's, indeed all of Alabama's capitals, have in common with Moundville. All of Alabama's capital cities were, and still are, located on rivers. Rivers, historically and prehistorically, have been corridors of commerce. But times change. And with changing times comes changing technology.
In 1820, the newspaper here, the Halcyon, reports that the first shallow draft steamboat passed by St. Stephen's without stopping. And to me, that's the sort of death knell of the town. Since there was no real economic base to keep this town going, it slowly died. And by the Civil War, it was completely gone.
In this present day, Old St. Stephen's is known primarily by its past. The rich story of a once thriving capital is found in its history and in archaeology. Written records such as those found in family Bibles provide clues to the children, women, and men who lived in the earlier days of Alabama history. Archaeologists uncover a wealth of relics from what at the time was a rather affluent lifestyle at Old St. Stephen's. Today, I find Old St. Stephen's to be a quiet place to reflect on our state's 200 years. Campgrounds around the deep pool of an old limestone quarry give visitors a chance to combine recreation with reflection. The story of our second capital is, to put it mildly, different from that of our first. Early steamboat technology passed Old St. Stephen's by, Today's technology has Huntsville thriving as never before. But even in the Rocket City, you can find spots to step back into the past.
So we're giving them a taste of what life was like in the year 1819. For example, we have a program that emphasizes the Constitutional Convention, and so that's fourth grade course of study, and so we get a lot of fourth graders, and it exposes them to some of the characters who were here at the time.
His son, who was Samuel Moore.
Visit Constitution Village, and you'll discover an interesting fact about our very early moves to statehood, and that is the Constitutional Convention began and ended in less than a month.
Let's talk about some of the ways we would eat.
44 delegates came in the very hot summer of 1819. They began on July the 5th. They finished on August the 2nd in a hot summer wearing woolen clothing. And they had all of these ideas that they had to exchange. In those days, you didn't go and rent a room at an inn. You shared bed space. It's not too surprising that this happened over a relatively short period of time and was resolved. And it was sent to Washington, D.C., and on December the 14th, 1819, Alabama became the 22nd state.
No doubt, sharing bed space motivated our founding fathers to get the job done. But I'm going to resist suggesting that this might be a way of encouraging modern politicians to find solutions. On the other hand, you know the old saying, politics makes strange bedfellows. Constitution Village gives students a hands-on connection to early history. And in Alabama's bicentennial years, we're all students of Alabama history. Stepping into Alabama's past is not always a walk in the park. Sometimes it's a wagon ride.
If you were here in 1820, I'd like to say it's often more like Gunsmoke than Gone with the Wind. It was very much a frontier capital. In fact, the editor said women and children should not go out at night because of gunplay in the streets. This was a rough and tumble frontier created out of the wilderness town overnight.
Lovely Philadelphia bride needed a little convincing.
The federal government gave a whole square mile of land to the state on which to create its capital city. Everywhere else, it was a pre-existing town. For some other reason, they just set a state house in it. Governor Bibb designed an entire town, and a very, very elaborate town to be our first state capital. Even before they had the Constitutional Convention in 1819, in May, they were building the state house here. So we hadn't even become a state until later that year.
Old Cahaba is a good place to explore many of the mysteries of our early statehood. Mysteries like, where did that W come from?
During the capital period, if you pick up newspapers, Cahaba is spelt with a W. If you look at Alabama's first constitution, where they say Cahaba is going to be our first state capital, it's spelt with a W. And the river also had a W in its name in those early years, until the late 1840s, 1850s, and there was sort of a urban renewal. I think they kind of shortened the name, and the W got dropped out.
I wish I could say that clears things up. But one thing I can say for sure, when you see the spelling of Old Cahaba, do not try to pronounce that W. Believe me, I've tried. We might be left to wonder what really happened to the W, but at Old Cahaba, centuries-old mysteries are being uncovered.
No, I wasn't mowing the grass this time. Part of our project this summer at Old Cahaba included using ground-penetrating radar to locate archaeological features that are buried, they're under the ground, and locate disturbances such as the State House wall. The wall itself was one of our objectives, and what we did was we laid out a grid in the area where the State House was thought to be, but its exact location wasn't known. In one of the radar-gram, there was an obvious feature included that matched the description of the State House wall from the original bid document. When we do the radar work, we get a good idea of what's under the ground, but until we go in and do what we call ground truthing, we're not positive what it is until that point. The excavation demonstrated that is the wall.
Archaeology can help us find the ground truth about many of history's mysteries. professional archaeologists have a variety of tools for investigating clues left by our ancestors. But very often those clues, those artifacts, are first discovered by amateurs. Since 1978, the Alabama Museum of Natural History has sponsored its annual museum expedition. The expedition is a unique summer opportunity for middle and high school students and adults to work side by side with professional researchers on field projects with important scientific significance. In addition to the Alabama Museum of Natural History expedition, citizen scientists can find public archaeology days open to young and old across the state and throughout the year at sites like Old St. Stephen's and Old Cahaba. Hands-on empirical science can tell us quite a story about our early state. Sometimes, though, stories about generations past are best told as, well, a story.
Sometimes they'd take their girls out and they'd walk up into the cemetery.
Well, as much as we would like people to come here because it's the first state capital or many of the other historical reasons, most people come here because it's a ghost town. So they're attracted to the mystery, but also the authenticity.
And they have a paranormal investigation team that comes and they open up the building and let I told you guys about the field trip and said, look, we're going to this place, Old Cahaba, that was the first state capital of Alabama. And many of you are like, okay. And then I said, and now it's a ghost town. And what was your reaction? What? Yes, I want to go ghost town.
Is Cahaba haunted? Have I ever seen a ghost? That's a question that I'm constantly asked. They want to hear the ghost stories. We conduct a haunted history event. They ride the wagon hearing the traditional ghost stories that we've collected. Some stories made famous by Catherine Tucker Wyndham, stories dating to the 1860s. Cahaba in the 20th century was a dead town, but its population was still about 100.
There is no archaeology of ghosts or of the paranormal. As archaeologists, we look for facts. We look for facts in the ground, we look for facts in documents. Fiction does sometimes inform the fact. There is often a grain of truth in every myth and every story. And so as archaeologists, we do look towards those stories to see if they can contribute to our understanding.
Okay, but what about just stories in general? Why are stories so memorable for us?
Maybe because we can relate to some of them.
We can definitely relate to some of them. Why else? They're entertaining, right? And do they teach us anything? Sometimes they do, right? Even in the stories, and these are kind of the best stories, even in the stories that...
History really is stories. And for the entire course of human development, the way we have communicated our values, the way we've taught our children about the past is through stories. And that's why I think that our teachers need to know and to have those stories. They need to know them themselves. They need to love those stories. And when they have them in their own minds and they have them in their own hearts, and they tell those stories to their students, those students will come to love those stories. They will know those stories. They will appreciate those stories.
About ourselves. And I think more than anything else, that's the biggest draw for Old Cahaba when we went, right? Old Cahaba, when you go into the park, there's a slogan on there that says, authentic history shrouded in mystery.
Who among us doesn't like a good story, a good mystery? Like Guy Noir trying to find the answers to life's persistent questions. Sometimes it's a matter of asking the right questions. And as we visit Alabama's fourth historical capital, I'd like to ask, capital with an A or capital with an O? From 1825 until 1846, Tuscaloosa was the capital of Alabama. In 1829, a capital was completed in Tuscaloosa. And the new capital city had a new Capitol building.
This is the Capitol as built by William Nichols, a very impressive building. It was built very similar to the National Capitol in Washington that would reflect the bicameral nature of state legislatures. The House was over on the left, Senate on the right, And the lower floor housed the governor's office, and at the very back of the building was the state Supreme Court. The entire government was housed in this one building. It was complete enough for the legislature to meet in the building in 1829, and it was used as the Capitol until 1847.
In just about 25 years, the new state of Alabama had decided to move its capital for a fifth time. And you would think if you're going to relocate your seat of government yet again, there must be a good reason.
The whole East Alabama, from the Montgomery County line to the Georgia line, is still held by the Creek Indians after the Creek War of 1813, 1814, until the 1830s, and the U.S. and the Alabamians seized that land from the Creeks, and in the early 1830s, they move in to occupy the former Creek territory. So the people in East Alabama are unhappy that they have to travel all the way across the state to Tuscaloosa to get to the capital. By the 1840s, there's a new push to move the capital from Tuscaloosa to a more central place. And a new Capitol building is built by the people of Montgomery, and the legislature convenes here in December of 1847 for the first legislative session here in Montgomery.
With a new Capitol building in the new capital city of Montgomery, the old capital city had to find new uses for the old Capitol building. Nowadays, Capitol Park in Tuscaloosa, and that's Capitol with an O, evokes ancient European ruins. Archaeologists and historians resurrected what they could find of the old Capitol building to create something of a portal to the past, especially for the fourth graders at nearby Capitol School.
You guys did a wonderful job outside looking at the monument stones and actually walking through the ruins. And I think one of the things that you all found so much evidence of were those mason's marks.
There you go. What is that?
Looks like a mason mark, and a mason mark is when...
It would be really nice if we could go back and interview the masons today and find out, how did they decide on their design? What's better, to just look at it in a book or to be able to experience it? So when we go out and we actually touch the mason's marks, and we touch the rotunda and we see the plans, right? We can imagine being there.
There's no one alive today who doesn't know Montgomery as the capital of Alabama. Montgomery, at least so far, is the last of the 5 historical state capitals. And up until Montgomery, no capital lasted more than 20 years. We've seen many of the reasons why our historical state capitals did not last, but there's another question yet to be answered. Why would any town want to be a capital in the first place? Is there prestige in being a capital? Is there political clout? Is there an economic benefit? Is there a cultural boon for the city?
I think it was all of those things. I think there was a lot of prestige and there was a lot of glory that came with being the capital of the state, but there was a lot of expectation that it would lead to economic opportunities, access to power. And for that reason, the first Capitol building that was built here was built by the people of Montgomery as a lure to the state to move to Montgomery.
When you look at Montgomery today, it's hard to believe that this was once an Alabama capital, and just a mere 200 years ago. The capitals of this land we now know as Alabama speak to our past in many different ways. Through monuments to powerful ancient cultures, through hard evidence of daily life hidden just beneath the soft earth, through reenactors who delve into the language, crafts, and customs of a bygone era, through mysteries, legends, folklore, and even ghost stories, through ruins giving rise to a romantic notion of what once was. Through the past and into the future, our history is told in its capitals. Capitals with an A, capitals with an O. For an in-depth look at Alabama capitals, historic and prehistoric, visit the Discovering Alabama website.
Discovering Alabama is produced in partnership with the University of Alabama College of Continuing Studies. Discovering Alabama is produced in partnership with Alabama Public Television. Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History. This program is supported by grants from the Solon and Martha Dixon Foundation. The Alabama Wildlife Federation, working for wildlife since 1935. And the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Alabama, providing educational and social opportunities for adults.